Welcome to tutorial 4 of GameMaker 2, and today I'm going to go into a few things. We're going to talk about introducing some sound to the game. We're going to do a little bit of coding and show you how to do some scoring. First of all, I'll again just go to my game screen so you can have a look at that. So I'll move across there now. One thing you might have asked yourself if you followed through the first 3 tutorials and all 9 videos is, why didn't I make the hamburgers move? Or why did I make the balls bounce in an odd way? I made the balls bounce randomly, if you remember, because I thought I'd make them go to the end of the last part of the maze down here. And if I brought them to the last part of the maze, I could then end the game. That's one of my goals in this game. And if I made these bounce accurately, they would just keep going through the maze, and then I wouldn't have to go through the trouble of trying to move them myself and trick them into progressing through the maze. But if you're interested in making things bounce accurately, like the game Pong would do, for example, where you have a bat at each end of a playing ground and the ball bounces evenly across the walls when it hits the walls, then with GameMaker 2 you need to introduce a little bit of code into your game. So let's have a look at that. To do a bit of code for the hamburger, let's make the hamburger bounce around. First of all, you set it in a direction like we've already done, and you've already identified here that when it contacts the player, it destroys the instance of the hamburger. Now in here I'm going to introduce some sound, but before I do that I'll show you how to make it bounce. To do that you need to add a step event, which I've already done here, but you will click here, you'll click those 2 footprints and click step, and then you'll come up to an event up here because it will create a step event. And inside the step event, you have to introduce a bit of computer code. That particular tool is here under common. So if you go to common and then go to this arrow and underline, you'll see execute code. When you introduce that code, when you bring that in over here, it will be completely empty as this is. Now I'll just get rid of that because the code I've introduced is already here. So if we have a look at what I've produced here, and I'll go in and I'll move that across again, I want to show you clearly how you do this. You will have to read this and write this code in yourselves. To do that, you actually have to copy what I've written here. To make the code work, let's have a look at what I've written. It says, it's an if statement, two if statements. One says, if place meeting. You might ask yourself, what does that mean? That is an internal GameMaker coding object, which works out when 2 objects collide. So it's talking now about the hamburger, and it's talking about the hamburger moving along the X and Y axis, the X axis in particular, at a particular speed. That's the horizontal speed, which means it's moving from left to right or right to left. And the Y remains the same, we don't worry about that. for this first if statement. And if it connects with an object called wall, then it will reverse the speed. So it will reverse the speed here. So we're assigning a negative value, but to the speed, we're multiplying it. Actually, that's a multiply symbol, the star symbol, which is found above the 8 on your keyboard. It is Shift 8. And in programming, in all programming, the star represents multiplication, just like the kind of X symbol does, or the cross symbol in mathematics. But in coding, it's always the star. Now, so we're multiplying the speed by -1, which means it's going in the opposite direction. So we change its direction. And again, if it meets X and Y, where Y speed, so this again is talking about vertical speed, and vertical speed is up and down, not right and left. And so it again, if it hits an object called the wall, it will reverse the vertical speed. And that H speed and V speed are again two internal what's called variables inside GameMaker. And I'll just show you why I have written wall. Wall is in red here, which means it's an object that I'm using. If I go down to my objects down on the right, you'll see that wall is the name of our wall. If I was to call that anything else, let's call it a wall, you'll see there's an error, unassigned variable a wall reference. It says it doesn't exist, and that's why it's turned blue, and I have to call it wall. So when you've got this bit of code in, and you should be able to copy that now, I've had it on the screen for some time, or you can pause it, and you must write that in here under the step for the hamburger to make it work. Now we can have a look at what that does, but before we play it, I thought I would add a bit of sound. So I'm now going into the player, and I need to bring in sound. On the right-hand side here under resources, we have sounds, and I'm going to create a sound. And I'm going to create a sound by bringing a sound in. Now, I don't really create it so much as, well, I can create it, but I need to find the sound. And the sound I've decided to use is mushroom. So again, I'm in my resources sounds, which we haven't used before, and I'm opening that up. And if I play it, I can hear it. Not sure if you could hear that, but you'll see that that's our sound. So I've now introduced the sound by assigning that file to sound 0. You can see I've been successful over here because you can see the sound symbol there next to sound 0. So now I'm going back to my hamburger, because when the hamburger collects with the player, we're going to play the sound. So we need to find where that tool is, or the object that plays the sound, and we need to bring that in. So this is what we're doing here now. So I'll just compress that a little bit. So we'll make them a little bit easier to kind of read and see. And if I go down here, mouse and keyboard, gamepad, movement, collisions, drawing, tiles, audio. In audio, we have play audio, play a sound effect or a music track. So you could, in fact, bring in your own music. You could have background music that you're playing constantly if you wanted to, but let's not worry about that now. You can experiment with that if you wish. There's all sorts of commands here for audio, but this is the one we want. So when the player connects with the hamburger, we're going to play sound 0. And that's really all we have to do. We don't loop it, or it'll make the sound over and over and over. We don't have to worry about any target. We're just playing the audio. So we're going to leave that there. We'll save our work by pressing our Save Project button up here. The other way to save is by going File, Save Project. I hope you've been saving everything, and we're going to play our game and we'll test it. Again, we're compiling it. We'll just wait for that to start up. And it should start over on the other screen so I can have a bit of a look. And once I play this, if I'm successful, which we always hope we are, then I'll go and restart this recording so that you'll have a part B for tutorial 4. I've got lots of things happening over here now. You can see the hamburgers are bouncing around and I can hear them making a sound. So this hamburger, when it hits the player, and if I move the player around, I'm making the hamburger disappear, I'm collecting them. And the next thing I'm going to do is give myself a score for every time I collect a hamburger. And that's one of our goals of the game. So if I collect the hamburgers and then make the balls go to the end of the maze, then I've been successful in the game. To start with, I'll probably just make it score enough to go to the next screen when it's collected all the hamburgers, because it's going to be quite time consuming to get these balls to the end. It's quite tricky. I've done it, but you'll see what I mean when you're doing it yourself. So I'll finish this video there and I will go and start again, and then I'll show you the rest of this tutorial. So here we are in tutorial 4B, and I was here and showing you how to play audio and how to write this code to make the hamburger bounce evenly around the walls. Because the hamburgers traverse through the maze, if you keep your player still, you'll collect all the hamburgers, which is why I didn't really do that with the ball. It would be too easy to get it to the end. But you could do that for the ball if you wish. You only have to put this executable code inside the step event for whatever object it is that you're trying to make move around your walls, or through your walls, not through the maze. And now we're going to do some scoring. And to do scoring, it's quite complicated. First of all, we need to create another object. And I'm going to create a special object. And this object I'm making, I'm going to call score, the score object. You'll notice it's already in use, of course. Okay, I'll call it score1. Let's rename it to, because score will be an internal variable name, which is why I couldn't do it. You'll see here I've got my object score up the top here. And when you use a name and it says the name's already used, just make sure you use a new name, because there are many internal variables and you can't use any name for that. Usually when you make an object, you add a sprite to it, but there is no sprite associated with the scoring object, so don't get confused about that. You need to have a create event for scoring, and in the create event, you actually do something a little bit special. You're going to set a global variable. So we're doing a bit of programming here, a little bit of coding, and we need to set a global variable. So to set a global variable, we have to go across here until we get to the one saying set global variable. And that is this kind of world symbol, global, with the arrow pointing to it. So we set the global variable and we give it a name. It already has the name variable there, but we're going to call it player score. And it's important that you're very, very consistent with all of this. So you need to use the same terms all the time. So it's global player score. When you reference it, it will be global dot player score, which you'll do a little bit later. To get the score running, you need a kind of counter, and the counter has to run as I'm scrolling with my mouse wheel now to get that up there. I'm going to scroll through an alarm. So the alarm command is another object, which is here that we need to program, and we'll look for that. We're going to use drawing as well a little later. Quite sure where this alarm is. I might have missed it. Let's have a look. It looks like a clock. It's not rooms, not files. Must have gone past it. Timer. Timer. So our timer is set alarm countdown. Set alarm countdown is what we're after. There it is there. When we set the alarm counter, we don't want it going too fast. It needs to work out what's happening. This is really counting in milliseconds, if you know what that is. It's each 10th of a second approximately, or 9th of a second, it's going to work out the score for us. So that's where we start with that. Now, the next thing we need to do is to actually go into our draw event, because we have to draw a score onto the screen. So we're going to add a draw event here, and now we're going to use these score commands that we were looking at a little before. So we need to draw, we need to set a font. So we're going to select a font and set a font for the score, and we're going to place that on the screen. Then we're going to align it and give it a color and give it a value. So let's do that. So we need to find set font. So where's our set font? Set font, there it is. So we're going to set our font. Now we haven't got any fonts here. So when we bring our set font onto the screen, we notice that there are no fonts. And that would be a concern, except we have a font object over here. So what we do now, we need to create a font. So we do that by going here, and we can select which font we want that's on our system. I think I'll just simply use Arial, and you can see what it looks like there. It's a clear font, it's easy to use. You could make it bold if you wanted to, so it's clearer, and you can change the size if you want. And I'm going to make it a size of 16. I might make it bold even. So we'll leave that font there. It's called font naught. Now I'm going back into our score object, and I'm going to look for the font again. I've now got font 0, so I can select that, and I've selected font 0. So that's the font that's going to draw on the screen. We're now going to align the text. So we're going to set font alignment. And so we need to find the correct object for that. Set text alignment. And we put that here. We're going to make it left and top. That's fine. And then we're going to change and draw the color. So to draw the color, we use this paint bucket, and we're going to select a color for it. I thought it might be a good idea, because of our wall, and this will appear maybe overlapping the wall, that we will use that yellow color. So we'll use all of, well, these are hex codes for the color. You don't have to worry too much about that. And now we're going to draw a value. And when we draw a value, we can tell it what to write before it gives our score. And we tell it where to draw it. So this is going to be the draw value is there, and we bring it across, and it says caption. Well, caption can mean anything, but for the starter here, I'm going to call it burgers because we're collecting burgers. That's what we're doing. I mean, we could write the word score. You could write your score. You could do whatever you like. Now here, you don't want it to be at 0.00. That would be starting in the exact top corner of the screen. So I usually bring it down and across a little bit. So I'm going to bring it down 50 pixels, and I'll bring it across 50 pixels as well. So that's where it's going to draw the score. But what is the value of the score? Well, we know we've created a variable called global dot player score. Now, it comes up with a global variable there, so we can click on that at this point and put that there. So now we're going to save everything. And at the moment, we still haven't told the program where it is scoring. And of course, it does score when we have it collide with the hamburger. So we go into the collision event of the hamburger, and that's where we tell it to add a score. This is also a bit tricky, but we need to then go into the hamburger itself, and where the hamburger collides with the player, that's where we need to start thinking about the score. And so we need to add a bit of logic here, a programming bit of logic called an if statement. And I know this is getting complicated, so you want to pause this and come back later so that you can do this. Now we have a bit of logic there. If variable, we'll bring that across here. We could put that up the top. I think it's a good idea. We can put it down the bottom, that's okay. So after the hamburger disappears, we're going to say if the variable of player score, if the variable of global dot player score, and it comes up for us, and we can click on that, and we can say if the global player score is equal to a number, so we can say if it's equal to 12, or did I have 10 of them? Let's say 12. We'll make sure there's 12 on the screen. If it is equal to 12, what we're going to do is something. But what? Well, we can go to the next screen. I've made another room here, which in fact is an end game screen. And I've simply made an end game here, a game over, and that's where I'm going to go. So let's go back to our hamburger, and I'm going to go to another room. So there's lots of things happening here. So when I go to my next room, I have to find the next room key. This says go to next room. So that's what I want. So I want to go, okay, if it is equal to 12, go to the next room. But what is the next room? it already knows there is the next room in order, room 1. The other thing I need to do is, if it isn't 12 yet, if it hasn't got all of the hamburgers, then we want to add 10 to the score. So we need another variable. So we kind of need an else statement here. So we find our else. So we're going to put that under here. And we say else. It shouldn't be there. That's better. So you can see go to next room follows the if variable now. You put it to the side of it like I just did then, and you can see a blue line, and then it'll fall down there. So now what about else? What are we doing with our else? Well, we need to assign a variable again, and we need to assign the variable player score a value, and we need to increase the player's score. So we're going to find our variable assignment, and we're going to assign the variable again, and we put that here. So we put it to the edge of the else, and we're going to say the variable will be global dot player score, and we're going to make it 1. You can see here when I have written this code, where I've written this code, that I've decided to change this greater or equal. We can have an equal, but it's probably better logically to do a greater or equal. And although I have 12 burgers, I'm giving it 1 less value of the burgers that I've got. And it seems to work when it gets to the 12th burger. So you might remember that for the number of objects you've got on your screen. So when it gets there, if it gets there, if it goes to the next room, and the next room is the end game room. Otherwise, it adds 1 burger to the value of burgers, and it will draw it to the screen. But it won't draw it to the screen until we put our score object onto the room. I'm going to do that now. So I go to the score object and I highlight it here and I drag it across over to the screen. And you'll notice that it appears as a very tiny question mark. That's because it's an invisible object. You can't really see it until it starts drawing the score value. And we'll have a look at that. But because we think it's going to go to the next screen, let's have a look at room 1. And I'll show you another trick that you might like to include in your final room. Now, what I did here for my last screen, you can see I've got a room. Now, the room's a bit bigger than these images I've got here. I downloaded a play again button and I downloaded an exit button, and I won't work on the play again button now, but I'll show you that the game over image here I made in Photoshop myself, and I brought it in as a sprite. There it is there, game over. I just added the sprite and I found the game over screen, and then I made it into an object and I just dragged it onto the screen in the same way as I would any other object really. And then I did the same with the exit button and the play again button. They're also objects, and I dragged the exit button over onto the top of the game over object. With the exit button, if we go to the exit button, we need to code it. So what we want to do is to press the exit button and have it quit our game because we might have finished. So we're going to go mouse down, mouse, left down. So we're using the mouse button now. And when the mouse left down button is pressed, we want it to end our entire program. So we're going to do that now by going right down to the bottom where it says game. We could restart the game, and we'll probably do that for the other button, for the play again button. But in this case, we're exiting the game, so we put that here, exit game. Now we'll save all of that, and now I'll play it. And we're almost at the end of this tutorial 4. I'll play this and hopefully it'll work, and you'll see that we've got more or less a complete and basic game where I'm collecting hamburgers. I haven't programmed the balls to do anything just yet, but I've got the hamburgers and I've got some scoring. So now you can see I've got burgers 0, burgers 1, because a burger collided with my little game player object, and I have to go and collect these burgers. They're making a sound as they're meant to, and I can go and chase them around and I can collect them. And I'm up to burgers number 10, and I've got to 11, but it doesn't do anything yet, which is kind of odd, but that's the logic I was talking about. It's sometimes important. I can't get past that ball, so I have to chase past that. And now I've got to the game over screen, and I'm pressing the exit button, and that exits the game. So that's the end of today's tutorial. I know it was a long one. I hope you enjoyed it, and good luck with your game making.